Did you know there are full animals preserved exactly as the way they were, frozen from tens of thousands of years ago, that we have found? There's something deeply disturbing about being able to look at a dead animal and still count its eyelashes thousands of years later. Most creatures that die leave behind some bones at best and maybe a faint impression in some stone if they were lucky. But most animals don't even get that mercy, with the earth breaking down the creature so quickly it doesn't even get a chance to rot. The earth's frost is something different though. Instead of the animal rotting like it normally would, or being eaten by bugs, it's completely frozen in time, held solid in the exact position the animal experienced its final moments in. The animal waits thousands of years and sometimes even tens of thousands until the ground shifts or a miner randomly blasts through a wall of rock and it's found, leading to a disturbing discovery of an animal that no longer exists from a time that is long gone. Right now frozen beneath the permafrost of Siberia, deep in Canada's riverbeds, and locked inside amber that are millions of years old, are the bodies of animals and creatures that used to exist. These animals are completely intact with all their flesh, fur, organs, and sometimes even the blood from when they first got trapped. Today we're looking at 6 prehistoric animals frozen completely in time and the details of what the scientists who found them saw when they were finally dug up, which were genuinely unsettling. In the summer of 2016, a gold miner in Canada's Yukon Territory was blasting through a frozen wall with a high-pressure water hose when he noticed something starting to melt out of the ice. It was not gold or anything normal you would expect to find. Instead, it was a wolf pup, and she was so perfectly preserved that when scientists got their hands on her, they could still see the papilla on her small tongue. The wolf pup was named Zur, meaning wolf based on the language of the people local to the area. She had been locked in permafrost for over 57,000 years. The pup was only 7 weeks old when she died, and her body was so fragile it was still only in an early stage of puppyhood. Her face was almost indistinguishable from a modern wolf pup's, despite dying thousands of years ago. Every part of her was intact from her fur to her eyes. Scientists then ran a series of x-rays, sampled her DNA, and studied her isotope levels. And what they found only made things stranger. Her diet was found to be almost entirely aquatic. Zur had been eating almost completely fish instead of the usual bison or deer, which was extremely unusual for any wolf in that time or region. To this day, scientists don't entirely know why a 7-week-old pup raised in the Yukon was surviving almost entirely on fish, how she died in the first place, or why she was ever frozen solid for over 57,000 years. Today, Zur is the most complete Ice Age wolf ever recorded, and she's so small she literally fits into the palm of your hand. In 2014, a man named Alexander Banderov was sailing past a ravine in Siberia when he noticed something hanging out of the ice above him. He assumed it was something normal to the area like a reindeer carcass. He pulled over his boat and walked closer to get a better look. What slowly fell out of the frozen bank was something he didn't recognize at all, and it was deeply disturbing. What landed at his feet was a baby woolly rhinoceros that had been there for roughly 34,000 years. Scientists decided to name the specimen Sasha after Alexander, which turned out to be a fitting name since despite countless attempts and in-depth analyses, research still cannot determine whether Sasha was male or female. What scientists did discover is that the rhino was around 7 months old at the time of death and already almost 5 feet long, literally being bigger at 7 months than a modern African rhino would be at a year and a half. When scientists prepared the animal for analysis, they expected its fur to be completely dull and degraded. Instead, they found the woolly rhino's coat was still thick, soft, and fully intact, down to the dense, insulating undercoat still there beneath the long guard hairs. The texture and surface also confirmed what scientists had long predicted about the species, but no one before this had actually seen a woolly rhinoceros well enough to prove it. This baby woolly rhino was the first one ever found anywhere in the world. Scientists also found the rhino's eye, ear, nostrils, and lips intact, making Sasha the first and only baby woolly rhino in history to have ever been seen by humans. Looking at the photos of her gives a real glimpse into a creature that used to be everywhere on Earth. Next is Yuka, a woolly mammoth that was between 6 and 9 years old when she died, around 39,000 years ago on what is now the Arctic coast of Siberia. The leading theory is that she probably fell into a lake or got stuck in a swamp and couldn't pull herself out. When she was recovered from the ice, her fur, trunk, tongue tissue, and much of her soft anatomy were still intact. Researchers then found something even more terrifying on her hide, cut marks that were made by what seemed to be human hands. This meant prehistoric humans had probably butchered this animal 39,000 years ago and left the evidence etched onto her skin, making Yuka not just one of the best preserved mammoths ever found on Earth, but also one of the earliest known pieces of evidence of humans in the Arctic. But the cut marks weren't the most disturbing thing scientists found. When scientists pressed into Yuka's tissue during examination, blood came flowing out. Scientists literally had dark red blood coming out of an animal that had been frozen for 39,000 years. This was the first time in recorded human history anyone's ever retrieved flowing blood from a woolly mammoth. Researchers believe the circulating blood may have contained a version of a biological antifreeze that prevented the blood from fully crystallizing, an adaptation that likely allowed the mammoths to survive the brutal Arctic winters of the time. The cell nuclei in the blood even showed signs of biological activity, meaning Yucca isn't just a fossil or preserved body, she could be something scientists might one day actually clone and bring back to life. We could literally have a woolly mammoth existing again today if scientists put technology just a little further with samples like these. In 2016, paleontologists working in the Yakutia region of Siberia found 2 cave lions buried 7 meters underground, just a few meters apart from each other. These cubs have been there for around 12,000 years. They were frozen so quickly that their whiskers were still attached and their fur was still intact. Scientists could even count the individual toes on each paw to make the shape of the cubs' faces. The cubs were later named Yuan and Dina after the nearby Uyadina River. Both cubs were estimated to be only 2 weeks old when they died. Their eyes literally hadn't even opened yet, and they still had baby teeth developing inside their gums. The leading theory is that a landslide collapsed on the den while the mother was out hunting, sealing both the cubs inside before she could save them. The preservation was so remarkable that researchers spent years just trying to determine whether any residue of the mother's milk still remained inside the cubs' stomachs. Cave lions were absolutely enormous animals, significantly larger than modern African lions. They were literal apex predators of their time, ruling across Europe and Siberia during the Ice Age with no natural enemies. These lions sat at the top of the food chain, and it's insane to think scientists discovered 2 frozen cubs that now rest in their lab freezer. They literally look like they just fell asleep a couple hours ago, when in reality they've been dead for thousands of years. In 2011, a heavy equipment operator named Sean Funk was working in an excavator at an oil mine in Alberta, Canada, when his machine scraped against an object that wasn't a rock. The object was extracted over several weeks of careful manual labor, and what came out of the ground was a 110 million year old armored dinosaur that looked less like a fossil and more like something that had died yesterday. The dinosaur was a Nodosaur, a massive heavily armored herbivore covered in plates and spikes. What the miners had discovered is considered the most well-preserved large dinosaur specimen ever found, and it's not even close. The actual skin was literally still there and sitting on top of the armor plating. A team of specialists then spent over 7,000 hours across multiple years carefully preparing the animal for study. After analyzing the pigment found in the preserved skin, paleontologists discovered that the Borealis pelta had a reddish-brown coloration on its upper body. This color may have acted as a camouflage, even though the animal probably didn't need it given its armor. The camouflage may have helped break up its silhouette as it moved. The fact that a dinosaur covered in armor and spikes still needs camouflage says a lot of how dangerous and deadly the Cretaceous period really was. Scientists then looked into its stomach and were able to examine the contents of its final meal, which turned out to be almost entirely soft fur and fronds. The leading theory is that the dinosaur drowned in a river. Due to its large size, the body then floated intact until it reached the Western Seaway, before slowly sinking to the ocean floor, where sediment buried and preserved it. It might not have been frozen, but it was preserved remarkably well, sitting in rock for over 110 million years. In 2018, a researcher named Antasia Saktovich was working in a lab with ancient soil samples pulled from the Siberian permafrost 16 years earlier. The samples came from a fossilized squirrel burrow that scientists had found buried 40 meters below the Arctic surface. When she added water to the frozen sediment in her lab, something disturbing happened. It moved. The thawed soil contained microscopic roundworms and nematodes that had been frozen solid for 46,000 years. The worms had been in a state of cryptobiosis for over 46,000 of those years. They entered the state during the Pleistocene epoch, when woolly mammoths were still alive and modern humans had only just begun exploring Africa. They stayed frozen and motionless for 46,000 years until Antasia added water in 2018 and accidentally woke them up. Within hours, the worms were eating, and soon after they were cloning themselves, since this kind of worm doesn't need a mate to reproduce. The species was completely unknown to researchers before then. These worms had been frozen for over 10,000 years, only to resume living with apparently no negative side effects. The species was named Panerolemus collimaensis. Luckily, they weren't some kind of ancient parasite or dangerous pathogen, but it makes you wonder what other creatures might be frozen deep in the earth waiting to thaw out. Scientists to this day can't even answer that question. What else is out there right now frozen in a permafrost waiting to rejoin the world? With permafrost melting and global temperatures climbing every decade, new animals and worms will keep resurfacing, and hopefully they'll be friendly. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to subscribe and hype the video. Bye.